Hello everybody, welcome to this Thrive Tribe video. I'm delighted to welcome Kristin Amadon, who's come to talk to us today. Hello Kristin.
Hello.
Kristin, whereabouts in the world are you?
Actually, I'm in Plymouth, Massachusetts on Cape Cod.
Fantastic.
United States.
USA, wonderful. But you don't live in the USA, right?
No, I live in the Netherlands.
Okay, it's a long story. We'll cover it on another video.
Right, yeah.
So Kristin, thanks very much for joining us today for this conversation, which I know is going to be a lot of fun. What triggered the idea for this conversation in my mind was I happened to catch the video you made of the speech you gave to TEDx in the Netherlands. I think 2 or 3 years ago now, something like that.
Yeah.
On the subject of future makers. And I also noticed that you call yourself storyteller when I was looking at your LinkedIn page. So I know that you've got a lot of interesting stories on the subject of thriving. These videos are all about how to thrive, how to get more meaning from the life experience. And so you're somebody who springs to mind when I think of that subject. So I'd like to start by asking you to maybe tell us a little bit about what you do now.
Right.
And in particular, what do you mean by future makers? I think it's a wonderful, evocative name, future makers.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know what you mean by that.
Well, I'll start a little bit with what is a storyteller for me. A storyteller for me is actually how is it that I translate people's strategies and ideas into a story to make it real and tangible for other people to personalize what's happening for that company. And so I take them on a journey of a beginning of an idea all the way to how it starts and where it should kind of end. So if you look at the innovation curve, you have innovation, but you also have the S curve that goes all the way to the top. And a story is something that takes people on a journey. It entices people, it makes it personal, it makes it passionate. It also needs to make business sense so that you're translating somebody's product or somebody's good idea into something that they can hold and something that they can make their own. So storytelling for me is business development, basically, and taking people's ideas into fruition. I use words, I do it in videos, but I also help coach people understand what that means in their job and what that means in their team. Also how that translates into how does what I do impact planet Earth. And that for me is my passion, and that ties over to the future makers. Okay. So, yeah.
So when you talk about somebody having an idea and then you're helping them to turn it into a story, can you just give us some kind of example of what kind of thing that could be? Just to make
it can be, sure, it can be anything. So I have a background in learning and development the last few years. And what we do is we take people on a learning journey or a learning expedition. And that can be a program that you design from beginning of where a person starts all the way to where they should end at the end of 5 days. So it's a journey that you take people on. So that is actually a product. So we're selling ideas into making sure that people can do programs or learning about themselves. But if you look at the storytelling and product development, going back to our times of what is telecommunications and how is it that we package that. So we can tell a story. For example, what we did together years ago is we designed the first global contract, and that was an agency contract. And we had to tell our customers a story of why it was that this contract was going to solve their problem and why is this product going to help connect them. So it can be anything from a service all the way to a product as well.
So it's kind of bringing a context or a framing to what's going on so that people understand how this thing fits in the broader picture. Right. And why we should care about it. Is that right?
Right. And I don't do anything that I don't believe in. So that's where I take my human side of enterprise into it. So I cannot sell people's work or understand or create a story around something that I think is crap. And I just don't do it. I can't do it. I fail. Actually, I fail bad. Like, if I don't believe in it, fail big time. So it's a combination of business development, passion, but creativity, but also it's about being the spider in the web. So you have to think in different ways that human beings want to connect to the story, and how that they can bridge that to create their own story from what it is that you're telling. So anything that I tell is just a bottom line. It has to go into, how does this translate into end customer, or that person, or the team, or the organization. And for me, I always tie in planet Earth into that, because without it, we're nothing, basically. And that's, again, the future makers.
Right. So, yeah, so you're raising all kinds of things in my mind here, this subject. The whole subject of story or narrative, I think, is fascinating, because, you know, one of my real strong areas of interest at the moment I do a lot of research into is consciousness, and what does that mean, and what does a higher level of consciousness mean?
Right.
So it's to bring in the wider subjects of the planet and so on. And I think part of being more awake, aware, which is part of thriving, I think, having that higher consciousness of being more aware of what's going on is recognizing narratives. It's spotting that that's what's happening, that we're part of a story, and I am a story, and you're a story, and you're just touching on that network of different stories of all these different individuals.
Right.
And how things to move forward need to make sense in all of those stories. So that's a huge area, I think. I think even people noticing that there is a story is an awakening. I don't know whether you've had moments, you know, through your career where you've started to spot that, I don't like this story very much, I'd like to change it. In fact,
yeah,
in fact, I know you have, because I have to confess now, we worked together 23 years ago, when we were both much younger than we currently are.
Right. Exactly. So, and no, but I mean, I also think, Paul, you know, it goes back to, you know, if you go into that conscious mindset, that conscious leadership, that conscious way of thinking and acting, you know, when we worked together 23 years ago, you know, we were both young, naive in a certain perspective. And I think that level of consciousness, it develops over time. But I also think that certain people do have that level of awareness that I don't really get it yet, even though I'm young, and I'm ambitious. So there is a mindset, there's a value system there, there's a leadership perspective, you know, that we develop as we go. And I think conscious leadership is also about how it is that we're going to create a better future, not only for ourselves, for our children, but also for the community, but also for nature and things like that. So that openness, that mindfulness and consciousness is, we cannot escape it anymore. We are in a climate crisis. So we have an opportunity as humanity to create that change. And we have to be aware of what we can do. So it's not just ambition, it's about commitment as well. So,
yeah, and leading on from that, the other thing that struck me about what you said just now was how your personal value system came into all this, when you were talking about how you won't work on something you don't believe in. Now, it seems to me that's a value system. That's something that's probably evolved for you over time, where you've begun to realize what matters to you and what doesn't matter to you. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I've always done it subconsciously. I think that people's subconscious is always there. We have something called a gut feeling as well. And that gut feeling also leads us in our choices, and also who we attract around us. So my grandfather always said, birds of a feather flock together. And I tend to keep running into the same people that I share those values with, and I want to continue to share that positive vibe with. And whenever I find myself in a place where I'm not truly acting in that conscious value system that I want to be in, I like I said earlier, I fail. I mean, and big time. I don't do it small. I mean, I just go, boom, and she's down and like crawling back up again. You know, it's just like, it's painful, but you know, but then again, I bounce back, and then I'm reflective, and then I think, okay, that was a good lesson and a lesson learned.
Yeah,
so
I think you and I have something in common on this, actually, because I also was telling you just the story just before this video that, you know, I reached a position in corporate life where I couldn't do it anymore. I mean, I physically couldn't do it anymore because it was so offending my value system. I might not have been able to articulate it in that way at the time, but, you know, I really didn't feel good about what I was doing, so I had to get out of it. But what's interesting about that is I think you and I seem to both have quite extreme reactions to those things. And I think maybe, you know, the vast majority of people perhaps are able to just ignore the fact that they're working suboptimally on something they don't really believe in.
Right.
And they're able to just put up with it, which is fine if you're happy doing that. But what I'd like to suggest to all the people listening is that that's not probably optimal for you personally. You're probably not getting the best from yourself. You're probably not enjoying it that much, even though you don't kid yourself it's okay.
Right.
And thrive. So one of the things thriving is about for me is being aware in the way you've been describing, and then saying, I have to do something about this. This isn't good enough for me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I think that my experience is that blowing up corporate life in a way, exploding capitalism, if you want to say, and we are transitioning from the 20th century hangover of greed and of the economic system into the 21st century, which is the holistic approach. And we're, like I said, we're having a hangover from that time period of how do we unlearn what we've been learning since the Industrial Revolution, and how do we transform into a holistic system dynamics way of approaching organizations, flat organizations, self-driven organizations, and that has 100% to do with purpose. And if you look at the different, I've been exploring going back to corporate life, and seeing, because I believe that the large corporations can be the changes that we need in society in a massive way, in a global way. If we want to reduce the CO2 carbons and the emissions in the world, we need the companies like Arcadis to change its fleet of ships and how they build cities. So we need that circular economy. So I've been exploring that. And now that I'm in the United States, I'm also seeing that there is a resistance to change, where in Europe, there is a absolute movement of change. So, and even in the corporate life. So B corporations, Patagonia, we're looking at Danone. These are companies that have changed their drive from growth into values leading to value. And that to me is very interesting in this transition. It goes back to what you were saying, Paul, in the sense of how do I personally identify that with my purpose? And you can say that we're not happy as an individual, but why would anybody want to hire half of you if you're not working from your purpose? Yeah. So if you look at constructive ways of hiring people and bringing people into organizations, if they're not passionate about it, you're getting less than half of a person, and that is also not a sustainable business model. So that's my experience.
No, I think that's right. I think it's to me, it's a lose-lose. It's nobody's winning in that situation. The individual isn't, and the organization isn't, because they're paying money for, as you said, half the effort, half the person. Right. And the growth thing you mentioned is really interesting, because it sort of resonated a little bit with me, because one of the things I'm very big on is, I think a big part of our experience here as thrivers is personal growth.
Right.
Growth is a good thing. And then I'm thinking, wait a minute, but in capitalism, maybe growth is a bad thing.
Yeah.
But actually comparing those two things, what I mean by growth is learning and choosing a direction and living true to your values. That's growth. Right. As opposed to the other kind of growth, which is I'd like to have a bigger TV, more of this and more of that, a lot more, a bigger house. That's a different kind of growth, right?
Yeah, and I think that people are struggling with that, especially, I've been working with millennials, which are just amazing creatures on planet Earth, and they are different. They have a totally different approach to how it is that they want to thrive. What are their value systems? Do they want to go to work today, or do they want to work 12 hours today? And it's all up to them. And I think, and I can learn from that to a certain degree, But what I also do is I also translating thriving into my awareness and self-awareness as well. I'm not a millennial and I don't want to be, but I embrace them doing it as long as I can live my life as well. So that has been a weird experience. Sometimes I think there are also people that I realize, Paul, that are just really, I think it's really sad. I mean, I also work with these people that are hamsters in a wheel, and they just keep recreating instead of stopping, thinking, reflecting, then acting.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing that that society and the marketplace is missing, is because of this growth factor. We have to grow, so we have to go faster. Actually, what I think we should do is slow down, reflect, and be smart and create a good path. And companies are trying to do that. At least in Europe, they're trying to do that. I have not experienced that yet wholeheartedly here in the United States, but I might not have found the right people yet. So I don't know. Yeah.
You just reminded me, I was reading an autobiography yesterday by a stand-up comedian. You may have heard of Eddie Izzard. Do you know him? He's a British comedian.
No, I don't. Yeah.
He has played in the States a few times. Look him up. He's very funny.
Okay.
But I was reading his autobiography yesterday, and he was saying it took him a few years to realize that getting there quickly wasn't what it was all about. It was getting there as good as you can.
And
so he had to focus back on quality because he was so impatient to be a superstar. Yeah. I'm going back to when he was a kid, learning how to be a comedian and so on. And he realized actually what this is all about is making this as good a product as I can, not about how quickly I get there. And then, of course,
that's right. I mean, if you try to make a quick loaf of bread, you can't, because you have to wait for the yeast to rise. I mean, it's just like a force majeure right there, because, we tend to think as human beings that we are in control. And I think that we also think that we live to be in business. But actually we forget that human beings created business. We created economy. Aristotle was one of the first definers of what is happiness. That is the pursuit of happiness, right? But he also says that it is human behavior that wants to create an economy. Economy does not exist without human behavior. So how is it that we consciously want to contribute to the marketplace, to the economy? And this is the mind switch into the future maker idea that you originally started with, is how do we become, of course we need leaders, but we also need future makers. And future makers are leaders who decide consciously to create a better future. But that needs time, that needs reflection. And that's some of the things that I've been developing over the last few years, so on.
So what's fascinating about this, I think, what all of these different threads that we're randomly discussing are coming together for me into, actually there's one central theme here, which is about learning. And you mentioned it very early on in the conversation.
Right.
So many people seem to spend their lives not learning, which strikes me as odd, right? but strikes them apparently as normal. And I think what sometimes happens psychologically, certainly in the UK where I am, I think there's a tendency to get to the end of the education process and believe that you've learned it, and now it's time for the reward. And I just don't feel that way about life at all. I mean, there's, learning will go on forever, and we're happier for it, aren't we?
I think so, because the thing is that, what I liked about going back to school, a couple years ago, I went to an executive education program at MIT on sustainability. And what I really enjoyed about that, because my previous years is on learning and development, but that's on the human side of human side of enterprise, if you will, the soft skills. Who are you? How do you feel? But what I thought that I was missing was the business side. So I had to go back to school and I had to read these really thick business cases, on Walmart, on system dynamics. And I was sitting there in this library and I was just like so happy, and I'm dyslexic and that's quite challenging for, a document like this, but I was just in the flow, man. And what I did was I applied what I learned. I took that essence of learning and I apply it to every single day that I'm having conversations, I'm taking it into the conversation I'm having with you. I take that into storytelling. I take that into my clients. I put that into programs or into marketing. So that learning, that is the sort of content side of it. But what I think you're also talking about is the learning of oneself.
Yeah.
And I think that's, a lot of people forget to do it. It's a shame, because you miss out on so much fun. You don't have to believe your own bullshit. You actually realize it's bullshit. You can just go.
We touched on values earlier and acting in accordance with your values. And that's the kind of thing I mean when I talk about learning in this context, is self-awareness, understanding who I am, what's most important to me. These things are layered, I believe, and they change with maturity. So I think throughout our lives, it makes sense to me anyway, to continually re-examine what those things are for me and how can I live more and more in alignment with them, in congruence with them, rather than feeling like what I'm doing is offending one of my values and feeling very uncomfortable about it, which is what you were describing earlier.
Right. Yeah. I think that there's for me, what my studies and my experience over the last few years is that we have core qualities, and those core qualities actually are in our alligator brain. We learn from our parents, what we learn from our great-grandparents, what we learn from our children, what we give to our children and to our great-grandchildren. Those are our core qualities. Those are things that I personally can't escape from. They're always there. And they mutate over time as I get older, and they develop, like you said. They grow up, become deeper. They become more aware. So I work with that level of consciousness in the things that I want to do. I recently just stopped a project, for example. I just couldn't do it. I was hired to do something, and I put my hand up and I just said, excuse me, guys, this is not a sustainable business model for me. If I'm only behind the computer 8 hours putting out fires, I'm fine in a fire. I can start a fire. I can put it out. I can chop the wood. I'm not going to sit here and do fire. Okay. Otherwise I'd wear a hat. And so I actually stopped that project, and they said, okay. And I said, and that was a risk for me to do that. That's income. That's security. I knew I wasn't going to be there and I wasn't going to do a good job. So I took the risk and I just said, and like,
and let me just, build on that a little bit. That's a great example, I think, of the whole thing we've been talking about. The natural tendency in such a situation is to say, what's the best income result for me? What maximizes my financial gain in this situation? That's why we commonly see so many people going along with things that we eventually say, but that's terrible. Why did you go along with it? And it's that unwillingness to risk the loss of personal financial gain by saying, this is not something I can do or agree with, I
was scared. No, I'll be honest with you, and felt very vulnerable, and I'm a tough cookie. And so I had to really go into, okay, it's all right to be scared, but I have to do this because I'm 50 years old and I don't want to waste time. And I'm not old, but I'm also, I don't want to waste time. I want to have fun. If I'm not having fun, I'm not enjoying myself and the work that I do. If I'm not passionate about what I can bring into it, forget it.
So this is a nice way of wrapping up and summarizing the Future Makers idea, and I'll let you add to this. But it seems to me that what we're talking about is somebody designing where they're going and what it might look like. Right. Not at the nuts and bolts level, but in terms of the kind of thing I would be doing in life to make me feel happy and fulfilled would be this kind of thing.
Right.
But where you've got to be careful, I think, is not trying to say it's a job that looks like this and it pays that much and it's just outside my front door, because then it becomes impossible. You have to trust the universe to kind of deliver stuff for you. But you can get much clearer about what makes you more fulfilled, more happy, what you will do, what you won't do. Right. And that just, it seems to me, gives you some direction. as opposed to being dragged along wherever everybody else is going?
No, I think that, you know, maybe I'm a little bit of a forerunner in that, a risk taker, maniac. And I just, I've spent a lot of time doing some reflection on how it is that where I was when I was in my 20s has an influence on what I'm doing now. Mm. And I will get paid for what I'm doing, and I'm good at what I do. And I'm not just saying that because of ego. I'm saying that because I have a real track record. And finally, I'm shocked with what I've produced. You know, I was like, oh, okay, the Arctic Circle or Antarctica or things like that. And so the things that I did when I was 24, 25 have a definite influence on who I am today. And I take that in. I didn't know that, Paul, until I was designing the Arctic program and designing the concept of what is a future maker. And what I did 24 years ago with the recycling program that I started at Portland State, and also I wrote an article on the Mick boycott. We boycotted against McDonald's. And what we did in that boycott has a fundamental impact on recycling and how McDonald's works with their packaging. Mm-hmm. So what we did was we protested against them. We used the U.S. Senator for you know, power of the city. And what that did over the years is it changed an entire global movement of what the footprint was of McDonald's. Not on their beef, but definitely on their use of styrofoam and plastic. Wow. And so when you think about a company, you know, little Portland, Oregon, little protester in a suit, because I was always trying to be cool, you know, like the sophisticated protester, is that we changed their impact in 72 different countries all over the world today. That's a future maker. Yeah. And that's what I bring into my storytelling. And right. So it's all intertwined.
So just to wrap up then, how would you summarize what thriving means to you? Is it, in a nutshell, is it becoming a future maker? Is that the same as thriving?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. I think I think thriving is something, it goes in waves. Because also you have times where you don't feel like you're thriving, even though you might be okay, you might be down. And I think that that's normal. In human behavior and circumstance. But thriving for me is really to live my dreams as a future maker. And I don't know what that means yet, but I'm not afraid to keep trying. And I don't go for low-level ways of doing it. I go for, you know, okay, let's talk to Shell. Okay, let's go for it. And why can't I do it? So, for example, if we wanted to get a big banana on Thrive, I would call them to say, hi, my name is Kristin, Mr. Branson. I would really like you to do this interview for free. Can you do it? So I'm not afraid to go into those places. And that's part of my personality. But that's what I want to do. And that's how I thrive.
Yeah. Part of your personality, but also being clear about what matters to you as well. So there's a motivator, there's a drive there to it.
Yeah.
Fantastic way to end. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay. Thank you for having me. This was fun. It was nice to talk about the future makers and Thrive and the Thrive Tribe. So this is cool.
Thanks very much for joining us, Kristin. We'll speak to you soon.
Okay.
Bye for now.